where the porch light always stayed on. You know, there's something about coming home that just settles your soul. I'm sitting here on my front porch tonight, watching the sun paint the sky in those colors that only God himself could dream up, and I can't help but think about how far I've traveled just to end up right back where I started. The screen door behind me creaks the same way it did 20 years ago, and somewhere in the distance, I can hear the gentle hum of life that only small towns know how to sing. Life in Eufaula, Alabama, has a rhythm different from anywhere else. Slower, more human, more rooted in something real. If this kind of story brings back something in your heart, go ahead and subscribe to PorchTales, give it a like, and share it with someone who still remembers how it used to be, because Lord knows we need more people holding on to these memories. I was 15 that summer of 1987, back when everything I thought I knew about life got turned upside down.
This shirt I'm wearing, it stands for something real. It's for those who remember America's proud days, built on hard work, unity, and respect for the flag. We've got styles for men, women, and even the kids. Great quality, timeless spirit. Just point your camera at the QR code and wear what America stands for.
And set right again in ways I couldn't have imagined. Our house sat on Barber Street, one of those wide wraparound porches made of weathered wood that had seen 3 generations of my family rock away their troubles. Daddy would wake before the sun every morning, the smell of strong black coffee filling our kitchen like a prayer. Mama would appear soon after, wrapped in her faded cotton robe, turning on that old AM radio to catch the weather forecast, the static crackling like a campfire. They'd sit together on the porch, side by side in those wooden rockers that Granddaddy had made, listening to the sounds that marked the beginning of every day in our little corner of Alabama. The rooster from the Henderson's place would crow first, followed by the sweet chorus of mockingbirds in the old cypress trees that lined our street. Mist would rise slow and lazy from Lake Eufaula, like the whole town was still waking up from a peaceful dream. Even though we weren't farming folk exactly, our backyard was alive with purpose. Mama kept a small flock of Rhode Island reds that wandered free among the pecan trees, and her vegetable garden was the pride of the neighborhood. Tomatoes hung heavy on their stakes. Green beans climbed up poles made from cedar posts, and her okras stood tall and proud like little soldiers in neat rows. My little sister Emma and I learned early that every task had value, no matter how small. Collecting eggs from the hen house each morning, mending the chicken wire fence when it sagged, watering the garden when the Alabama sun got too fierce for the plants to bear alone. Growing up in Eufaula meant growing up with your feet planted firmly in red clay soil, learning to respect the time it takes for things to grow right and the wisdom that comes from watching the seasons change. Sundays were special in our house, like they were in most homes throughout Eufaula. Mama would spend Saturday evening preparing, and come Sunday morning, our dining room table would groan under the weight of love made edible. Golden fried chicken that crackled when you bit into it, cornbread so warm it melted the butter before you could spread it, field peas cooked slow with a ham hock until they were creamy perfection, and collard greens that had been simmering since dawn with just enough bacon to make them sing. The sweet tea was cold enough to make your teeth ache and sweet enough to make you forget every trouble you'd ever known. There was always room for one more at our table. Mrs. Patterson from next door might stop by with a mess of turnip greens from her garden. Pastor Williams would sometimes appear at our door, not because he was making rounds, but because Mama's reputation for Sunday dinner had spread through the congregation like good news. Old Mr. Jameson, who lived alone since his Martha passed, became such a regular that Mama started setting his place before he even knocked. That was the way of things in Eufaula. Nobody ate alone if there was help for it. Our town was small enough that you could walk from one end to the other in 20 minutes, but it was filled with faces that knew your name, your family, your story. Mr. Wesley at the drugstore would ask about Daddy's back problems and recommend the right liniment without being asked. Miss Dorothy at the corner cafe knew to bring your coffee to the table before you'd even settled into your seat. She kept track of how each customer liked their eggs, whether they wanted grits or hash browns, and if they needed extra time with the morning paper to work up the courage for another day. The calendar in Eufaula was marked by celebrations that brought the whole community together. 4th of July meant a parade down Broad Street with a high school marching band playing Stars and Stripes Forever, while kids scrambled for candy thrown from floats decorated with red, white, and blue crepe paper. Saturday mornings brought farmers and gardeners to the courthouse square with trucks loaded down with the best produce Alabama's soil could grow. Church cover dish dinners happened monthly, where every family brought their specialty and nobody left hungry. The annual fish fry at the lake drew folks from 3 counties, all gathered to eat catfish and hush puppies while the kids played in the shallow water and the grown-ups told stories that got better with each telling. Children in Eufaula grew up with a freedom that seems almost magical now. We'd ride our bicycles down dirt roads that stretched between cotton fields, the red dust kicking up behind us like clouds. Fishing at the lake meant cutting your own cane pole and digging worms from the garden, then sitting patient as job while the sun moved across the sky. We'd skip rocks on Miller's Creek until our arms were sore, and come home with mud between our toes and stories that made the day's adventures sound bigger than they probably were. When evening came, the magic really started. Fireflies would begin their nightly dance across the fields, blinking like tiny lanterns in the gathering dusk. The sound of crickets and tree frogs would rise up from every direction, creating a symphony that no city could match. We'd sit on the porch after supper, watching the stars appear one by one in a sky so dark and clear you could see the Milky Way stretching across it like spilled flour. Summer thunderstorms were events in themselves. When those towering clouds would build up in the west, dark and heavy with rain, we'd all gather on the porch to watch nature put on her show. Lightning would flicker inside the clouds like photographers' flashes, and thunder would roll across the countryside like God himself was rearranging the furniture in heaven. When a storm finally hit, rain would pound on our tin roof like 1,000 drummers, and we'd all move inside to the living room, where the sound was softer and we could hear each other talk. The electricity might go out, but nobody minded much. It was just another excuse to sit closer together, to tell stories by lamplight, and to remember that sometimes the best entertainment is just being with the people you love. Faith wasn't something we talked about much in Eufaula. It was something we lived. Sunday morning found our family at First Baptist, along with most of the town, voices raised together in hymns that had been sung by generations before us. Amazing Grace and How Great Thou Art echoed off the high ceiling while Mrs. Henderson played the piano with the kind of passion that made even the strongest men tear up. Before every meal, we'd bow our heads for grace, thanking the Lord not for luxury, but for everything that really mattered: family, health, honest work, and the peace that comes from a house filled with love. But that summer when I was 15, something happened that would change everything I thought I knew about life, love, and what it means to be part of a community. It started with a girl named Sarah Beth Crawford, who came down from Nashville to spend the summer with her grandmother. Mrs. Crawford lived in the yellow house with the prize-winning rose garden on Maple Street, and she'd been a fixture in Eufaula society for as long as anyone could remember. But nobody had expected her granddaughter to be quite like Sarah Beth. I first saw her at Dorothy's Cafe on a Tuesday morning in early July. She was sitting alone in the corner booth, sketching in a leather-bound notebook, her auburn hair catching the morning light that streamed through the window. She had on a simple blue sundress, nothing fancy, but there was something about the way she carried herself that was different from the girls I knew in Eufaula. She seemed older than her 16 years, like she'd seen things that had aged her in ways that had nothing to do with time. Dorothy, being Dorothy, had already learned Sarah Beth's whole story by the time I worked up the courage to ask. Poor thing lost her daddy in a car accident this past spring, she whispered while refilling my coffee cup. Her mama thought a summer down here with Mrs. Crawford might help her heal some. City life ain't always the best medicine for a broken heart. I found myself thinking about Sarah Beth more than I probably should have, wondering what it would be like to lose a parent suddenly, violently, instead of watching them fade away slowly like I had with my own daddy 3 years earlier. Daddy had been the strongest man I knew, with hands that could fix anything and a laugh that could fill up a room. When the cancer came, it came quiet at first, just a nagging cough that wouldn't go away. By the time Doc Matthews figured out what was wrong, it had already spread too far for fighting. Daddy lasted 8 months, getting thinner and weaker each day, but never losing that gentle way he had of making everything seem like it was going to be all right. The day he died, I sat with him on the porch, watching the sun set over the lake. And he told me something I'll never forget. Son, life ain't about how long you live. It's about how much love you leave behind. I was 12 then, and I thought I understood what he meant. I was wrong. After Daddy's funeral, our whole world shifted. Mama took a job at the bank in town, something she'd never had to do before. And suddenly Emma and I were spending more time taking care of ourselves than we ever had. That's when Mr. Harold Jameson, our neighbor across the fence line, stepped into the hole that Daddy's absence had left. Mr. J was 72 that summer, with hands like leatherwork gloves and a voice soft as morning fog. He'd farmed his 100 acres for 47 years, raised 5 children who'd all moved away to cities with names like Atlanta and Birmingham, and buried his beloved wife Martha 2 years before. Every morning at 5:30 sharp, Mr. J would fire up his old John Deere tractor, and the sound would drift across our property line like a familiar song. But it wasn't just the farming that made Mr. J special to our family. After Daddy passed, he'd taken upon himself to check on us regular, never making a big show of it, just appearing at the right moments with exactly what we needed. A jar of honey from his beehives when Emma caught a cold. A mess of corn from his garden when Mama's didn't come in right. Strong hands to help with repairs that were beyond what a widow and her children could manage alone. The summer I turned 15, Mr. J asked if I'd like to help with his hay harvest. A boy your age ought to learn what real work feels like, he said, but there was kindness in his eyes that took any sting out of the words. The work was harder than anything I'd ever done, starting before dawn and lasting until the sun hung low in the western sky. But there was something satisfying about it. Something that connected me to the land in a way I'd never felt before. Mr. J didn't talk much while we worked, but when he did speak, his words carried the weight of wisdom earned through decades of living. A man's character shows in how he treats his land. He'd say, running a handful of that red Alabama soil through his fingers. You take care of it, and it'll take care of you. Same thing goes for people, if you think about it. I spent hours on that old tractor, learning to cut hay in straight lines, to read the sky for signs of weather, to understand the rhythm of seasons that farmers have followed since the beginning of time. Those long, hot days working beside Mr. J taught me more about being a man than any sermon or lecture ever could. It was during the second week of July that I finally worked up the courage to talk to Sarah Beth. She'd taken to spending her mornings at the lake, sitting on the old wooden dock with her sketch pad, drawing the cypress trees and the way the morning mist hung over the water like smoke. I've been swimming there since I was old enough to walk, knew every fallen log and sandbar, every good fishing spot and swimming hole. But somehow, seeing it through her eyes made it look different, like I was seeing it for the first time. You mind if I sit? I asked one morning, my heart beating so hard I was sure she could hear it. She looked up from her drawing, those green eyes studying me for a moment before she smiled. I was wondering when you'd finally say something. You've been watching me from across the lake for 3 days now. My face went red as a beet, but she laughed, and the sound was like music. I'm Sarah Beth, she said, extending her hand like a grown woman might. And you're the boy who works for Mr. Jameson. Tom, I managed to say, shaking her hand and trying not to notice how soft it was compared to mine, which had grown rough from farm work. Tom Mitchell, and I don't work for Mr. J exactly. I just help him out some. Same thing, she said, turning back to her sketch. My grandmother talks about you at dinner. Says you're a good boy, responsible. That's high praise from Mrs. Crawford. We talked for an hour that morning about everything and nothing. She told me about Nashville, about the music she loved, and the art classes she took at school. I told her about Eufaula, about the fish in the lake, and the best places to find wild blackberries. She was different from any girl I'd ever known, asking questions that made me think, listening like what I had to say actually mattered. When she finally closed her sketch pad and stood to leave, I felt like something important was ending. Will you be here tomorrow? I asked, trying to sound casual. Probably, she said, then paused. Tom, thanks for not asking about my daddy right off. Most people do. I nodded, understanding without needing explanation. We'd both lost fathers, just in different ways, and sometimes the best kindness is knowing when not to poke at wounds are still healing. That became our routine. Every morning after I finished my chores at Mr. J's place, I'd head down to the lake where Sarah Beth would be waiting with her sketch pad and her easy smile. She'd draw while I talked, or sometimes we just sit in comfortable silence, watching the water and listening to the sounds of summer. She showed me how to really look at things, to notice the way light fell across the water, or how the Spanish moss hung from the oak trees like gray beards. You see everything, but you don't really see it, she said one morning, holding up a drawing she'd made of me, sitting on the dock. You know this place, so well you've stopped noticing how beautiful it is. She was right. Through her eyes, Eufaula became magical again. The ordinary places I'd known all my life transformed into something worth capturing on paper, worth remembering, worth treasuring. She drew the old courthouse with its white columns and red brick. The way the morning glory vines climbed up Mrs. Henderson's mailbox. The expressions on people's faces at Dorothy's cafe when they thought nobody was watching. "Why do you draw so much?" I asked her one day. She was quiet for a long moment, her pencil moving across the paper in sure, swift strokes. My daddy used to say that memories fade, but pictures last forever. After he died, I realized I couldn't remember the sound of his voice anymore, and it scared me. So I started drawing everything important, try to capture it before it could slip away. I understood then why she'd come to Eufaula, why she spent her days documenting our little town with such careful attention. She was collecting moments, storing them up against some future time where she might need them. It made me see our conversations differently, made me choose my words more carefully, made me want to be worth remembering. As July turned into August, Sarah Beth became part of the fabric of our summer. She'd join Emma and me for swimming at the lake, teaching my little sister how to float on her back while looking up at the clouds. She'd sit with us on the porch in the evenings, listening to Mama tell stories about what Eufaula was like when she was growing up. She even came to church with Mrs. Crawford, sitting in the third pew and singing hymns in a voice so pure it made the angels weep. The whole town took notice, of course. In a place like Eufaula, a teenage boy spending time with a pretty girl from out of town was news worth discussing over morning coffee and evening gossip. But it was gentle attention, the kind that comes from people who remember what it was like to be young and think they found something special. Dorothy would wink when she saw us together at the cafe. Mr. Wesley at the drugstore would ask how that nice Crawford girl was settling in. Even Pastor Williams mentioned in his Sunday sermon how wonderful it was to see young people appreciating God's creation together. But the best part of that summer wasn't the town's approval or even the sweet ache of first love. It was the way Sarah Beth helped me see my own life as something worth celebrating. She made me understand that the things I'd taken for granted, the closeness of family, the support of neighbors, the rhythm of seasons, and the comfort of tradition were rare and precious gifts that not everyone got to experience. "You're so lucky," she said one evening as we sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance across the yard. "You belong somewhere. Really belong. Do you know how rare that is? I didn't then, but I do now. Sitting here on this same porch 20 years later, I understand what she meant. In a world that moves faster every year, where people change jobs and homes and relationships like they're changing clothes, having a place where you're known and loved and accepted for exactly who you are is indeed a rare and precious thing." The 4th of July that year fell on a Saturday, and Eufaula pulled out all the stops for the celebration. The morning started with the annual parade down Broad Street, with a high school marching band playing The Stars and Stripes Forever, while little kids scrambled for Tootsie Rolls and peppermints thrown from floats decorated with red, white, and blue crepe paper. The volunteer fire department drove their trucks slowly down the street, sirens wailing, while the Shriners followed in their tiny cars, making figure eights and honking their horns. Sarah Beth had never seen a small-town 4th of July celebration, and her delight was infectious. She clapped for every float, waved at every politician, and cheered when the veterans group marched by in their pressed uniforms and polished shoes. "This is like something from a movie," she said, squeezing my hand as the color guard passed with the flag, snapping in the breeze. After the parade, the whole town gathered at the lake for the annual picnic. Long tables appeared as if by magic, covered with red checkered tablecloths and loaded down with food that represented the best of Southern cooking. There was barbecue that had been smoking since before dawn, potato salad made from recipes handed down through generations, corn on the cob sweet enough to make you cry, and watermelon so cold and perfect it tasted like summer itself. The afternoon was filled with games and contests that brought out the competitive spirit in everyone. There was a three-legged race that ended with half the participants in a laughing pile on the ground. A watermelon seed spitting contest that drew surprisingly serious competitors. A pie-eating contest that left the participants looking like they'd been in a food fight, and a horseshoe tournament that the men took far more seriously than their wives thought was healthy. Sarah Beth and I entered the canoe race, and despite my lifetime of experience on the lake, we came in dead last because we spent more time laughing than paddling. We didn't care. The prize was just a blue ribbon anyway, and what we were collecting that day was worth more than any ribbon could represent. As evening approached, families spread blankets on the grass and settled in to wait for the fireworks. Children ran around with sparklers, making patterns in the gathering darkness while their parents watched with the kind of contentment that comes from perfect moments. Sarah Beth had brought her sketch pad, trying to capture the scene, but eventually gave up and just watched, her head resting on my shoulder. When the fireworks finally started, launching from a barge anchored in the middle of the lake, the whole crowd fell silent except for the occasional ooh and ah as colors exploded across the dark sky. Red, white, and blue flowers of light bloomed and faded, reflected in the still water like a mirror. The grand finale lit up the entire lake, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world was celebrating right there in Eufaula, Alabama. "I wish this could last forever," Sarah Beth whispered as the last echoes of the fireworks faded across the water. "I wish the same thing, but already I could feel time slipping away." August was coming, and with it the end of summer, the start of school, and Sarah Beth's return to Nashville. We didn't talk about it much, but it hung between us like morning fog, something we could see but couldn't quite grasp. The last 2 weeks of July were the hottest on record, with temperatures climbing past 100 degrees and staying there. The corn in Mr. J's field stood tall and still, waiting for rain that seemed like it might never come. The lake dropped several inches, exposing sandbars that hadn't seen daylight in years. Even the crickets seemed too tired to sing their evening songs. But the heat didn't stop Sarah Beth and me from meeting at the lake every morning. If anything, it made those early hours more precious, when the air was still cool and the mist hung over the water like a blessing. We'd swim before the sun got too high, then sit in the shade of the old cypress tree, talking about everything except the fact that summer was ending. It was during one of those mornings that Sarah Beth told me about her father. We'd been sitting quietly, watching a great blue heron hunt for fish in the shallows, when she suddenly started talking. "He was driving home from work," she said, her voice so quiet I had to lean closer to hear. "It was raining, and a truck ran a red light. The police said he died instantly, that he didn't suffer. They always say that, don't they? Like it's supposed to make it easier." I didn't know what to say, so I just listened the way she taught me to do. The worst part is that we had a fight that morning. Something stupid about whether I could go to a concert with my friends. I was so angry at him, and those were the last words we ever spoke to each other. Angry words over something that didn't matter at all. She was crying now, not the dramatic sobs of someone seeking attention, but the quiet tears of real grief. I reached over and took her hand, feeling helpless, but wanting her to know she wasn't alone. "Your daddy knew you loved him," I said finally. "Parents know that, even when we're being awful to them. My daddy told me once that teenagers are supposed to push away from their parents. It's how they learn to be their own people. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there." She squeezed my hand gratefully. "How did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise," I said. "I just know about losing someone you love." We sat there for a long time, holding hands and watching the heron. Finally, she turned to me with something like determination in her eyes. "Tom, I want you to know that this summer, meeting you, getting to know your family and your town, it's the first time since Daddy died that I felt like maybe everything might be okay again." Those words hit me harder than any declaration of love could have. To know that somehow, just by being myself, I'd helped heal a hurt I couldn't even imagine. That was better than any prize, any ribbon, any recognition I could have asked for. The first week of August brought news that changed everything for our family. Mama came home from the bank one evening with a look on her face that I'd learned to recognize. The expression she wore when she had something important to tell us, but wasn't sure how we'd take it. "I got offered a promotion," she said, settling into her chair at the kitchen table where we always had our serious conversations. "Assistant manager at the main branch in Montgomery. It's good money, better than anything I could make here, and there are opportunities for advancement." "Emma," and I just stared at her. Montgomery might as well have been on the moon as far as we were concerned. It was the big city, 3 hours away, a place where nobody would know our names or our story or care about either one. "We don't have to decide right away," Mama continued, but I could hear in her voice that she'd already made up her mind. "What would mean leaving Eufaula, leaving our house, our friends, our church, leaving Mr. J," I said, and Mama nodded sadly. "Leaving everything," Emma whispered and started to cry. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Sarah Beth had said about belonging somewhere, about how lucky I was to have roots. The idea of pulling up those roots and transplanting our family to Montgomery felt like dying a little bit. But I also knew that Mama was thinking about our future, about opportunities that didn't exist in a town of 3,000 people, about giving Emma and me chances that small town life couldn't provide. I found Mama sitting on the porch at midnight, rocking slowly in Daddy's old chair. "You're scared too," I said, settling into the chair beside her. Terrified, she admitted. But sometimes being a parent means doing things that scare you if you think they're best for your children. "What would Daddy say?" I asked. She smiled at that, the first real smile I'd seen from her since she'd announced the news. "He'd say that home isn't a place, it's the people you love. He'd say that as long as we stick together, we'll be fine wherever we end up." I wanted to argue, to point out all the reasons why leaving Eufaula was a terrible idea. But deep down, I knew she was right. We were struggling financially, had been since Daddy died. Mama was working 2 jobs to keep us afloat, and even with Mr. J's help, there were things we needed that we couldn't afford. The promotion would change all that. would give us security and opportunities and a chance at a different kind of life. The next morning, I told Sarah Beth about Mama's job offer. We were sitting on the dock, and she'd been sketching the old barn on the far side of the lake. But when I finished talking, she set her pad aside and looked at me with something like understanding in her eyes. "When are you leaving?" she asked. "End of August, if Mama takes the job. She hasn't said yes yet, but I think she will." Sarah Beth nodded slowly. "Maybe it's for the best. I mean, I'll be going back to Nashville in 2 weeks anyway, and long-distance relationships are hard when you're 16. She was trying to sound mature about it, practical, but I could hear the hurt in her voice. The truth was, neither of us had talked about what would happen when summer ended, but we'd both been hoping that somehow we'd figure out a way to stay in each other's lives. "I don't want this to end," I said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know we're young, and I know everyone says summer romances don't last, but what we have feels different. It feels real." "It is real," she said, reaching for my hand. "But maybe that's exactly why we have to let it be what it was, perfect for the time we had it. Maybe trying to hold on to it would ruin what made it so special." She was wise beyond her years, wiser than I was certainly, but her wisdom didn't make the hurt any less sharp. I was 15 and in love for the first time, and the thought of losing both Sarah Beth and Eufaula at the same time felt like more than I could bear. That afternoon, I went to find Mr. J. He was in his workshop, a converted barn where he kept his tools and worked on projects during the hot part of the day. He was fixing a broken harness, his weathered hands working the leather with the kind of skill that comes from a lifetime of practice. "Heard about your Mama's job offer," he said without looking up. "Good opportunity for your family." "I don't want to leave," I said, settling onto a wooden stool beside his workbench. "I know you don't, but wanting and needing aren't always the same thing, are they?" He set the harness aside and looked at me with those eyes that had seen 72 years of life, of joy and sorrow, of hellos and goodbyes. "You know, when my oldest boy Jimmy graduated high school, he had a choice. Could have stayed here, worked the farm with me, maybe taken over someday. Or he could have taken that scholarship to Auburn, studied engineering like he'd always dreamed. It was the hardest thing I ever did, telling him to go. Do you regret it?" I asked. "Not for a minute. Jimmy's got a good life in Birmingham now. Wife and kids, work that challenges him and pays him well. But you know what the best part is? When he comes home to visit, he appreciates it. He sees the beauty in this place because he's lived somewhere else. He understands what he came from in a way he never could have if he'd never left." Mr. J picked up the harness again, testing the repair with gentle tugs. "Sometimes you have to leave home to understand what home really means. And sometimes, if you're lucky, that understanding brings you back." His words gave me something to think about, but they didn't make the leaving any easier. As the days passed and August settled over Eufaula like a heavy blanket, I felt like I was walking through a dream, trying to memorize everything before it disappeared. The way the morning light fell across our kitchen table, the sound of the screen door slamming behind me as I ran out to play, the comfortable weight of Emma's head on my shoulder as we watched television in the evenings. Sarah Beth and I spent every possible moment together, but there was a sadness underlying everything now, a bittersweet quality that made even happy moments tinged with loss. She finished her sketch of me sitting on the dock and gave it to me, writing on the back, "For Tom, who taught me that some places are so beautiful they live in your heart forever." Summer 1987. The night before she was supposed to return to Nashville, we sat on the porch swing at her grandmother's house, not talking much, just listening to the crickets and watching the fireflies. Mrs. Crawford had made lemonade and left us alone, understanding without being told that young hearts needed privacy for their goodbyes. "I'm going to miss you," Sarah Beth said finally. "I'm going to miss you too, more than you know. Promise me something," she said, turning to face me in the dim light from the porch lamp. "Promise me you'll always remember this summer the way it was. Don't let time change it in your memory. Don't let it become smaller or less important as you get older. Promise me it will always be this perfect." "I promise," I said. I meant it with every fiber of my 15-year-old heart. She kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of all the things we couldn't say. It was my first real kiss, and hers too, and it tasted like lemonade and summer and promises that we both knew we might not be able to keep. The next morning, I watched from across the street as Mrs. Crawford loaded Sarah Beth's suitcase into her car. Sarah Beth looked up at me and waved, then got into the passenger seat without looking back. I stood there until the car disappeared around the corner, carrying away the girl who had made that summer magical and leaving me with nothing but memories and a sketch that I knew I would treasure for the rest of my life. 2 days later, Mama officially accepted the job in Montgomery. We spent the rest of August packing our lives into boxes, sorting through the accumulated memories of 3 generations. Each item we decided to keep or leave behind felt like a tiny death, a small goodbye to the life we'd known. Mr. J helped us load the moving truck on the last stay. His presence both a comfort and a reminder of everything we were leaving behind. When the truck was packed and ready to go, he pulled me aside. "This isn't goodbye," he said, pressing something into my hand. It was a small wooden carving of a tractor, something he'd whittled during the long evenings after his chores were done. "It's just see you later. And remember what I told you about going away to understand home. Someday you'll be back." We drove away from Eufaula on a hot Tuesday morning in late August, our car loaded with the essentials we'd need until the moving truck arrived in Montgomery. I turned around in the back seat and watched our town disappear behind us, watched the lake fade into the distance, watched the life I'd known for 15 years become memory. Montgomery was everything Eufaula wasn't. Big, bustling, full of strangers who didn't know our names or care about our story. We moved into a subdivision where all the houses looked alike and none of them had front porches made for sitting and talking. The high school I'd be attending in the fall had more students than our entire town back home. Mama threw herself into her new job with determination. Emma started making friends in the neighborhood. But I felt lost, adrift, homesick for a place that suddenly seemed like something I dreamed. The letters from Sarah Beth helped. She wrote faithfully every week, long letters full of news about her life in Nashville, her art classes, her new friends. She always asked about Montgomery, about how we were adjusting, but I could tell from her questions that she understood how hard the transition was for me. Her letters were like visits from home, reminders that the summer we'd shared had been real, that the connection we'd felt hadn't been just teenage imagination. I wrote back, trying to sound more positive than I felt, telling her about Montgomery's attractions, the museums and theaters and opportunities that Eufaula couldn't offer. But between the lines, she could probably read my homesickness, my longing for the slow pace and familiar faces of the town we'd left behind. High school in Montgomery was a revelation, but not always a pleasant one. The classes were more challenging, the teachers more demanding, the expectations higher than anything I'd experienced in Eufaula. But there were opportunities too, advanced placement courses, debate team, a drama program that actually put on real plays. I found myself excelling in ways I never had before, my grades improving, my horizons expanding. Still, I missed the simplicity of small town life, missed knowing everyone's name and their story, missed the way neighbors looked out for each other without being asked. The city had its advantages, but it couldn't replace the sense of belonging that comes from growing up where your roots run deep. College took me even further from home, to Auburn University, where I studied agriculture and business, thinking maybe I could find a way to bridge the gap between the rural life I'd loved and the broader world I was discovering. Sarah Beth and I kept writing for 2 years, our letters becoming less frequent, but no less meaningful. She was thriving in Nashville, her art getting recognition, her talent blooming in ways that small-town life never could have nurtured. We both understood that we were becoming different people than we'd been that magical summer, growing in directions that were taking us further apart rather than closer together. The last letter I got from her came during my sophomore year. She was accepted to art school in New York, a dream opportunity that would take her even further from the Alabama girl I'd fallen in love with beside the lake. "I'll always treasure what we had," she wrote, "but I think we both know that trying to hold on to it would diminish what made it so perfect. Thank you for being my first love and for showing me what home can feel like, even when you're far from where you started." I never wrote back to that letter. What could I say? That I wanted her to give up her dreams and come back to Alabama? That I was willing to abandon my own plans and follow her to New York? We were both too young and too smart to make those kinds of sacrifices, and too much in love with the memory of that summer to risk ruining it with the complications of adult life. After college, I took a job with an agricultural consulting firm, work that took me all over the South, helping farmers modernize their operations while maintaining sustainable practices. It was good work, meaningful work, and it kept me connected to the land even as I lived in cities and suburbs far from my roots. Mama thrived in Montgomery, eventually becoming vice president of her bank. Emma grew up to be a teacher, married a good man, and gave Mama the grandchildren she'd always wanted. But something was always pulling me back toward Eufaula, a gravitational force I couldn't ignore. I'd drive through on business trips sometimes, amazed at how small everything looked, how the town had both changed and stayed exactly the same. The lake was still beautiful. The courthouse still stood proud in the center of town, and Dorothy's Cafe was still serving coffee to farmers who started their days before dawn. Mr. J passed away during my 3rd year of college, and I came back for the funeral. The whole town turned out to honor a man who'd spent his life quietly taking care of the people and land around him. His children had all come home too, successful people from cities across the South who'd never forgotten where they came from or who had helped raise raise them. At the graveside, his oldest son Jimmy, the engineer from Birmingham that Mr. J had told me about, pulled me aside. "Daddy always said you'd be back someday," he told me. "Said you had too much of this place in your blood to stay away forever. He left you something." He handed me an envelope with my name on it in Mr. J's careful handwriting. Inside was the deed to his 160 acres and a note that simply said, "For Tom, who understood what this land means. Take care of it, and it'll take care of you." I was 22 years old, fresh out of college with a good job, and my whole life ahead of me. And suddenly, I owned a farm I didn't know how to run in a town I'd left 7 years earlier. It should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt like coming home. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I quit my job in Birmingham, moved back to Eufaula, and started learning how to be a farmer. It wasn't easy. I had book knowledge, but no practical experience, money saved, but no equipment, enthusiasm, but no real understanding of what I was taking on. The learning curve was steep and expensive. The mistakes numerous and sometimes costly. But the community that had raised me rallied around, teaching me, helping me, accepting me back as if I'd never left. Mrs. Crawford was still alive then, 93 years old and sharp as a tack. She'd sit on her front porch in the evenings, and I'd stop by to check on her on my way home from the fields. We'd talk about farming, about the town, about how things had changed over the decades. She never mentioned Sarah Beth directly, but I knew she kept track of her granddaughter's success in New York, where she'd become a respected artist. Her work exhibited in galleries that people traveled from all over the world to visit. "She still asks about you," Mrs. Crawford told me one evening, and my heart jumped despite myself. "I tell her you're doing well, that you're turning into the kind of man this town is proud to claim." I never asked Mrs. Crawford to pass along any messages, and she never offered. Some things are better left as perfect memories, untouched by the complications of adult life and competing dreams. The years passed, and I found my rhythm as a farmer and a member of the Eufaula community. I served on the town council, helped coach Little League Baseball, participated in the volunteer fire department. I dated some, had a few relationships that showed promise, but never quite developed into the real thing. People would ask me when I was going to settle down, give them some Mitchell grandchildren spoil, but the truth was that part of my heart was still 15 years old, still sitting on a dock beside a girl with auburn hair who'd taught me what love could feel like. I was 34 when I heard that Sarah Beth was getting married. The news came from Mrs. Crawford, delivered gently, but matter-of-factly, the way you might mention the weather or the price of soybeans. Her fiancé was a successful businessman from Manhattan, someone who could give her the kind of life that matched her talents and ambitions. The wedding would be in Central Park in the spring, a small ceremony for family and close friends. That night, I sat on my front porch, the same porch where I'm sitting now, telling you this story. And I raised a glass of sweet tea to the memory of that magical summer. I wished Sarah Beth well, genuinely and completely, grateful for what she'd given me and happy that she'd found someone who could love her the way she deserved to be loved. A month later, Mrs. Crawford passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was smaller than Mr. J's had been. She'd outlived most of her contemporaries, but no less meaningful. Sarah Beth came down from New York for the service, and I saw her for the first time in 17 years. She was 33 then, still beautiful but different, polished by city life and success in ways that the 16-year-old girl beside the lake never could have imagined. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than I made in a month, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd achieved her dreams. But when our eyes met across the church sanctuary, I saw something flicker there, some recognition of the boy and girl we'd been together. After the service, she came over to where I was standing with a group of Mr. J's children, all of us middle-aged now, but still united by the memory of the man who'd helped raise us. "Tom," she said, and my name and her voice still had the power to stop my heart. "I heard about what you've done with Mr. Jameson's farm. Grandmother always said he chose well when he left it to you. Your grandmother was a special lady," I said. "She kept an eye on all of us over the years." "She did." Sarah Beth smiled, and for just a moment, I could see the girl she'd been. "She told me you never married. Haven't found the right person yet," I said, which was both true and a lie. "Maybe you have, and you just haven't figured out how to make it work yet," she said, and there was something in her eyes that made me wonder if she was talking about more than just my theoretical love life. We talked for a few more minutes, carefully neutral conversation about her career, my farming, the changes in Eufaula over the years. Then her fiancé appeared, a nice-looking man in an expensive suit who seemed genuinely fond of her, and she introduced us politely before they had to leave to catch their flight back to New York. "Take care of yourself, Tom," she said as they walked away, and I heard in those words an echo of the girl who'd made me promise to remember that summer exactly as it was. I never saw her again, but I kept track of her success from a distance. talents. Her paintings began showing up in major museums, her name mentioned in art magazines that found their way to the Eufaula Library. She had children, 2 daughters who, according to the brief mentions in newspaper society pages, inherited their mother's artistic talents. By all accounts, she built exactly the kind of life she dreamed of that summer when she sat beside the lake, sketching and planning and imagining what the future might hold. As for me, I kept farming Mr. J's land, watching it change with the seasons, learning its moods and needs the way he taught me to do. I added modern equipment when it made sense, experimented with sustainable practices that honored the old ways while embracing innovation. The farm prospered, became profitable enough to support me comfortably and to contribute meaningfully to the local economy. I hired help during busy seasons, young men from town who reminded me of myself at 15, eager to learn and proud to earn their pay with honest work. The town changed around me, but slowly, the way small towns do. Some businesses closed, others opened. Young people left for opportunities in bigger cities. Older residents passed away. New families moved in seeking the kind of life that places like Eufaula still offered. The lake remained beautiful. The courthouse still anchored the center of town, and Dorothy's Cafe, now run by her daughter, continued serving coffee to farmers who rose before dawn. I served 2 terms as mayor, helping guide the town through economic challenges while preserving the character that made it special. We attracted some tourism, people from Atlanta and Birmingham who wanted to experience small town life for a weekend, but we were careful not to let it change us too much. Some things are worth protecting, worth preserving exactly as they are. And now here I am, 35 years old, sitting on the same porch where this story began, watching another sunset paint the sky in colors that never get old. Emma lives in Montgomery with her family, but she brings the kids down regularly, and they're learning to love this place the way I did when I was their age. Mama retired last year and moved back to Eufaula, saying she'd had enough of city life and wanted to spend her remaining years where she could sit on the porch and know all her neighbors by name. The sketch that Sarah Beth drew of me still hangs on my bedroom wall, faded now, but still precious. A reminder of the summer that taught me what love could feel like and what home really means. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver at 16, if I'd fought harder to hold on to what we had, or been willing to follow her into the larger world she was determined to conquer. But I've learned that some questions are better left unanswered, some roads better left unexplored. What I know for certain is that everything that matters to me started right here in Eufaula, Alabama, in a summer when I was 15 and thought I understood the world. A girl with auburn hair taught me about art and beauty and the courage it takes to chase your dreams. An old farmer with gentle hands showed me that taking care of the land means taking care of the future. A small town with big hearts proved that belonging somewhere is worth more than all the opportunities in the world. The fireflies are starting their nightly dance now, blinking across the fields like they did that magical summer 20 years ago. The screen door behind me still creaks when the wind catches it, and somewhere in the distance, I can hear the evening train whistle, calling to anyone who might be dreaming of somewhere else to go. But I'm content right here, grateful for the journey that took me away, and wise enough to appreciate the grace that brought me home. If this story has touched something in your heart, if it's reminded you of your own small town, or made you grateful for the people who helped shape who you are, I hope you'll subscribe to PorchTales and share this with someone who understands that the best stories aren't always about grand adventures. Sometimes they're about learning to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, finding the sacred in the simple, and discovering that home isn't just a place on the map, it's a feeling that lives in your heart forever. The sun's almost down now, painting the sky in those familiar colors that never fail to take my breath away. Tomorrow I'll wake up before dawn, make my coffee strong and black, and spend another day taking care of the land that's taken care of me for all these years. And maybe, if I'm lucky, some young person will wander by and ask to hear a story about what life was like in the old days, giving me another chance to share the wisdom that only comes from staying long enough in one place to watch the seasons change, the children grow, and the dreams you thought you'd lost find their way back home where they always belonged. That's the thing about stories like this. They remind us that every ending is really just another beginning. Every goodbye contains the seed of a future hello, and every sunset promises another sunrise for those patient enough to wait and wise enough to believe. So go ahead and hit that like button if this story warmed your heart. Share it with someone who remembers what it feels like to belong somewhere special. And subscribe to PorchTales, because Lord knows we all need more reminders that the best parts of life are often the simplest ones, lived in the company of people who know your name and love you anyway. The first stars are appearing now, and the crickets have begun their evening song. Time for this old storyteller to head inside. Grateful for one more day in the place that made me who I am, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, and thankful beyond measure for the summer that changed everything and the love that never really leaves, no matter how far we travel or how many years pass by.